Hi folks, it's Tino here and welcome to our brand new series called CSC Stories right here on the Celtic Exchange. The series was inspired by the new book Football Without Fans, written and compiled by Davy McIntyre of CelticBars.com. And it's a book which is without doubt the definitive up-to-date history of Celtic supporters clubs across the globe. Throughout this new series, we'll be joined by many of the key individuals throughout those supporters clubs. And on that note, I'm delighted to be joined here today by Paul McCann and Mike Boyd of the Chicago Celtic Supporters Club. Mike, I'll come to you first. How are things over there in the Windy City?
It's good. I mean, it's a surprisingly warm February day in Chicago. No snow. We're all happy. I'm sure that will change. We'll get more snow probably until May, but it's good. Everything's good right now.
Good stuff. And thanks again for joining us. Paul, what about yourself? We had a wee chat before coming on there, and you're Glasgow born and bred?
Yep, born in Glasgow, grew up in Maryhill, moved to Chicago about 5 years ago after meeting my wife, who's from here. So I came here and joined up with Mike, Chicago CSC, and having a great time.
Great stuff. Do you get back to Glasgow in Scotland much, or is it harder to make the journey these days?
It's been a couple of years since I left it back, but I'm going back in May, so I'm looking forward to that. Stuff. I'm excited.
May is hopefully a nice time to be arriving back at Celtic Park. Hopefully there's another league title to look forward to. So generally speaking, just to get us going, Mike, I believe you're a co-founder of the Chicago CSC. So can you give us a wee bit of background in terms of, when the club was formed, generally, how many members you've got roughly, and how the club came to be?
Well, the club formed in 1995, and a lot of the CSCs in North America formed around the same time, because that was when we were able to start getting the live matches on a regular basis. So the umbrella group for North America, the North American Federation of Celtic Supporters Clubs, started out as a way to allow us to negotiate to get the matches on a regular basis. There had been Celtic supporters clubs, interested members of Celtic supporters in the Chicago area. They would get together to listen to shortwave broadcasts of important matches, like the night in Lisbon. But there was nothing organized and structured. And in the early 1990s, we started seeing occasional matches live. We would get the matches against the other mob and occasional cup finals. But in the 1990s, satellite time became more available and cheaper, and marketing, both in all parts of Europe, started realizing there was an untapped market to show matches to people that are interested in Celtic. I think they originally thought they would be mostly expatriates, but eventually the structure started. We formed the club. We started up with about 20 people. We would watch. We would get one match every 2 weeks. We were ecstatic at that. That was the 1995-96 season, when we only lost one match in the league, lost Scottish Cup semifinal to them, lost in League Cup to them. Frustrating season for the club, but it was a good first season for the Chicago CSC. And then that summer was the first convention in Las Vegas, and the Celtic Party flew through Chicago on their way to Las Vegas for the first convention. So we had, we hosted them. We had a dinner with Bobby Murdoch, Bertie Auld, Bobby Lennox, Jim Craig, a good group of Celtic support, of Celtic ex-players, and then other supporters on their way to Las Vegas. And then that just sort of, those first days just established something that we were able to build on, both in Chicago and through North America. And, here we are today, 30 years on. Clubs are still thriving, and there are places for people to watch the Celtic all over the world. And it's been nice to been a part of that.
Absolutely. And you mentioned there, I mean, hugely important figures in Celtic's history. You know, several Lisbon Lions you've touched on between Bobby Murdoch, Maryhill, Jim Craig. That happening, you know, in that summer of 96 then, was that a kind of a galvanising factor? You know, the fact that genuine Celtic legends could come and make an appearance in your club before kicking on to the convention. Was that something that almost gave you further inspiration that you were doing the right thing and heading in the right direction?
It was a nice reward for that hard effort that first year. You know, we always wondered if we were, if it was working. You know, we had, you know, there were always some technical challenges, you know, or challenges with the initial pub we were in. You know, sometimes, you know, we'd miss the first minute of the match. We'd miss goals. The audio would be sporadic. You know, we went through one match. It was a match against Motherwell in the early days where Celtic scored in the first minute, gave up an equalizer in the last 5 minutes. We thought we'd lost the match because we'd missed the first goal. Early days of satellite technology, you got a little, you know, we missed a large portion of the Scottish Cup semifinal that year because of satellite difficulties. You always wondered if you were, you know, if it never thought it wasn't worth it, but there were times you question your resolve. And getting that kind of response and getting people that were following up, you know, it was reassuring in the early days.
Yeah, I kind of wish we had technical difficulties of our own during the 90s, Mike, because there's a lot of things that I'd rather have missed altogether. Yeah. But that's maybe a separate story. Paul, I'll come to you. You know, obviously, we've mentioned there, you know, you're newer in Chicago. I think you mentioned to me before we started, 5 years you've been out there now. What's your own Celtic background story? I suppose it'll be very different between yourself and Mike in terms of, you know, how you first came to be a Celtic supporter. So what's your own kind of intro to Celtic, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, like most Celtic fans, there was no choice in the matter. I was born and had a Celtic top on. I got taken to my first game. It was Phil O'Donnell's debut at Firhill back in '94. That was my first game. Fell in love with the game. Went as much as I could as a kid. I think Larson's last season was the one season I had like a long-term season ticket, so I could go to every game. Mm-hmm. So I just fell in love with football then. And then after moving to Chicago 5 years ago, like most Celtic fans around that time, I was just obsessed with the team because we'd just won the double treble by that point. And I'd visited Chicago a few times. And the first time I came, like most Celtic fans, first thing I Googled was local Celtic Supporters Club. And first thing that popped up was A.J. Hudson's, where we drink with Mike Boyd and the boys. And I popped in, there was no game on. So I just popped in just to see what they had in the walls and stuff, and I liked the place. So I think I went back now and again with visits and stuff, but I never caught a game there. And then when I finally moved here in November 2018, first thing I done was like, when's the next game? And it was Rosenborg away. I think it was one of those rotten Scott Sinclair winners. It was a grim game, but it was kind of nice being around people. And it was just seeing how quickly that became important to me. It became important to me to make sure it was there for everyone. So I kept going along, got to know the guys and stuff, went along to Vegas a couple of years ago to the conference. And then a couple of years ago now, myself and a boy called Alan Wade, we just messaged Mike saying he's not got much of a social media presence and we'd love to get on that. So we got access to the social media and we've spent last year growing it, planning events and doing everything we can to get more people through the doors.
Brilliant. And is it that kind of thing where it's, you know, word of mouth as much as anything? I believe there's a huge Irish community in Chicago in itself, but is it a case, Paul, where yourself and other maybe either, you know, Glasgow-based folk or Scottish folk, you know, just reach out to each other and start to build the group through that?
Yeah, definitely. There's even been fans of other Scottish teams that have followed me on Twitter and DM me saying, I hear you're the guy to speak to about getting games on. I've helped like a couple of Kilmarnock fans, some Heart fans, some of that lot as well, begrudgingly. Yeah, a lot of it is word of mouth because there is a huge football or soccer culture over here, but we're always fighting against the Premier League, and we're always going to be. When people, especially the past year or so with all the political stuff going on, people are aware of Celtic and like Celtic, but convincing them to wake up at 6 a.m. to come watch them is a whole other story. So it's just about making that something that's more worthwhile and fun to do. So that's why we've been pushing the word of mouth. We're going to get stickers and just plant them around the city. So there's no way you can't know about us.
Yeah, and I'm sure you guys are delighted when you see some evening kickoffs coming back in around about this time of year. It gives you at least an extra few hours in your bed. Mike, from your own point of view, as I say, can absolutely understand Paul's story has been, a very kind of well-trodden path, born in this part of the world here in Glasgow and almost not having a choice in terms of becoming a Celtic fan. But what about yourself? What's your own story?
My story is kind of the opposite of Paul's. I made a decision to become a Celtic supporters fan or supporter. I would say I had been a Celtic sympathizer. I had been, going to Europe on my holiday to watch football through the years. I went to my first Celtic match was a Celtic Rangers match in March of 1993. And I went from being a sympathizer to a supporter, and then, around that point was the time that we were starting to get doing the groundwork to start the supporters club. And it came out of that. In those days, I would go back and forth, once a year or so, try to see as many matches as I could during that short time period, always go around this time of year, fixture congestion, would always work in my favor. If I might intend to see 2 matches in a 2-week period, I might get to see 3, sometimes 4. So that would always work out through the years. But, from my name, my family is Scottish, but we've been in America a lot longer than before Celtic started. So I made, growing up playing football, my coach was a Barcelona socio. So he taught me it was very important to choose what team I supported. And I think I made the right choice. Yeah,
I think you definitely did. Paul had mentioned where you drink. So AJ Hudson's, I believe, is the venue for the Chicago CSC. And I think you've had various places you've congregated over the years. I believe you've had some fairly well-known individuals come and visit you at different times. I think Paolo Nutini's quoted as being there, Rod Stewart and Dermot Desmond. Would that be right?
Yeah. I mean, we've been lucky because, Chicago is an important transit hub. We get a lot of people coming through on their ways to other places. Dermot Desmond was in Chicago when the Arlington Million was being run. So he and his son were in a pub, watching the match at early morning like everybody else. He was a good tipper. The staff liked him, which is always an important consideration. Rod Stewart has been around a couple of times. Whenever he tours in the Midwest, he bases himself in Chicago. So he'll try to see a match depending on where he's playing. He has been there for matches, left, flown out, done his concert, flown back to Chicago, come back to the next match, flown to Kansas City, played that night, mentioned that he was watching the match 4 hours ago in Chicago. So he's a good, he does our publicity for us in one sense. So that works out fairly well. Paolo Nutini, lovely guy, has been there. Usually every Celtic supporter that comes by has always been, brilliant, appreciative of the effort we put on and, enjoys it. And the members that happen to be there when they show up, they always enjoy meeting them.
Yeah, I'm sure it sounds a very welcoming place. Paul, Mike had mentioned some of the technical challenges, in those early days, mid-90s and beyond. Satellite TV wasn't what it was, and generally coverage of, I suppose, football globally, but certainly, here in Scotland wasn't what it's now become. How easy or straightforward is it for you guys to access now? Is it a Celtic TV type account, or how do you access the games?
It's actually probably easier than watching the game back home. I found that actually because with Celtic TV, we know we've got every game basically. I mean, we can debate the quality of the service for days, but the game's on. And then any televised game back home, so if it's on Sky or whatever it's on these days, it will be on CBS over here right now.
Okay.
So typically the away 6 a.m. kickoffs will be on, either on Paramount Plus streaming service or CBS Sports Network. So it is pretty simple to watch the games. I mean, internet issues come up all the time, or websites go down. I think we had a time recently where it went down and one of the members had to pop up and say, try my account, and that worked. So like, there are always issues, and yesterday it kept freezing. Right as soon as it hit stoppage time, the stream would freeze and we'd have to refresh it. But like, that's rare. That's probably the second time in 5 years I've seen an issue pop up.
Right.
And it's been good for the sport over here, because it's kind of similar to American sports and back in Scotland and the UK as a whole right now. It's just the streaming services, you put every sport on, so if you want to watch it, it's there. So it's like, even if, I mean, I'll do it, I've just skimmed through the TV and go, oh, the Argentinian league's on, I'll give that a watch. So I'm like trying to convince people, hey, Celtic's on. Even if you're looking for a game, stick the game on.
Yeah.
Because it's there. You're paying for it anyway, so might as well watch it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just to stay with it, Paul, there's a whole wealth of, I mean, America's sport mad in general, isn't it? And, just kind of refresh myself. You've got the Chicago Bulls, Chicago White Sox, Chicago Cubs, Chicago Bears. Have you found yourself embracing that as much as, Mike and others have embraced what Celtic do?
Yeah, I'm a big sports fan myself. Got the Cubs hat on now. I get to as many Cubs games a season as I can. Like, AJ Hudson's is just round the corner from Wrigley Field. So there's been times we've had people visiting from out of town, and we've sorted them out with tickets and took them to the game and shown them all the right bars to go to. Because Chicago is a sports town, and especially like for me, football is always going to be top. So I've become a huge Chicago Fire fan in the MLS. I've got involved with their supporters groups, and I've got involved with front office, and we've actually started working with them as a supporters club. They've been giving us donations for like raffles to have at the bar, sorting out events. They've got like ticket guys and standby if we need group tickets set up. So it's been really fun, because Chicago loves sports and we love it more than them. So let's join together and just have a good time, have a bevy.
Yeah, sounds good. Mike, from your own point of view, is soccer number one? I'm falling into the terminology, but is soccer, football number one for you, or have you got love elsewhere?
Well, I'm a Cubs fan. I've been to Cubs games with Paul. A long-suffering Cubs fan. So being a Celtic supporter is a very different experience than being a Cubs fan. I like hockey. So I would go see the Blackhawks. Hockey's the closest thing to football in America in terms of the action and being engaged and the crowd interaction. But I always tell people all the space that as an American should be full of American football is full of soccer for me. I don't really, football is somebody described football as all the things that are bad with America. It's mindless committee meetings followed by random violence. And so I've never been, never been an American football fan.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you've made the right choice there. Stick with that. And just to get back to the club itself, so obviously we've touched on the timeline there. So approaching 30 years, more or less. And I don't know if you guys have got any plans there in terms of marking that occasion. But out with that, I'll stick with you for now, Mike. Any particular, memories, during that time? Have you maybe been on any trips together? Any, particularly emotional cup finals or anything at all like that?
Well, certainly the, stopping the 10, 1998, we had, again, that was sort of in the early days of the internet, and people were getting in contact, wanting to know, I'm going to be in Chicago on business, or I'm in Chicago for an academic conference. Is there some place that we can get together with, Celtic supporters? And I'm like, yeah, at 9 a.m., you can come and see the match with us, and we'd plan, win, lose, or draw. We'd planned, a day of, singers and catered food. And, we were planning on celebrating the end of a great season. Mm-hmm. Luckily it was the end of a real great season. It may not have been, if things had gone south. That was obviously, very important to us. In 2007, as part of Celtic's preseason activities, they came to North America. They played a match in Denver as part of the preseason. They played against the the Major League Soccer All-Stars, and then they came and played a match in Chicago, which was very important for us because we got to, host a large number of people that were coming to Chicago for, maybe the only reason they were coming to Chicago was to see Celtic. And, we got to show them more of Chicago than just going to see the match and being at the pub before the game. So that was very good for us. It was also very important to us because one of our members had, who was a paramedic, had been killed in an auto accident right before that at Christmas time. And he was a big Celtic supporter. He was also a big Fire supporter. So it was a very nice chance for his family to come see, to meet his other families and have that. We had commemorative scarves made. We still have some of them, almost 20 years later. People still, think back about that, and it's always good to do those sort of things. One of the things that you realize in running a supporters club for as long as you do is that, members pass on. We have members that, obviously 30 years ago, of our founding 20 members, I was just doing the math, 6 of them have passed on in those years. A couple more are in, challenging health situations. We don't see them as often as we do. But on the other hand, just yesterday, one of their sons came into the pub right at the end of the match and was very happy to see the people. And he talked, it was nice to reminisce about how his father had moved to America in the 1950s and was one of those people that lived on people sending them newspapers of the matches and listening to the odd shortwave radio. And he talked about how his father, who was in his 70s when the club started, how much he enjoyed having the supporters club again in his life, just like it had been when he was in his teens and 20s, before he left Glasgow. So that's always important. That just makes it easier to keep going on when there are those 6 a.m. kickoffs and there are people there. Nobody really wants to be there, but they turn up. Sometimes people turn up out of duty, but it's always good to get that kind of feedback from people and do that. As Paul mentioned, it's much easier to watch the match, from your house on Celtic TV at 6 a.m. than it is to get up and deal with the weather and get down to the pub.
Yeah, I've no doubt about that. But it's important there, Mike, on a more serious note, it is important to remember that Celtic does it transcends football, and I know it's become almost a bit cliche, but Celtic is more than just a football team. There's so much more to it, and it's important that you remember those friends that are no longer here, and your friend the paramedic, and that his memory lives on. And it sounds like that's an important part of what you guys do at the club. Yes, it's about watching games of football and hoping that Celtic win, and more often than not at the moment we do win, but there's life beyond Celtic, and it's great to hear that you guys have approached that in what seems to be the right manner. And Paul, to come back to yourself, I suppose I'll ask you the question twofold. What are your kind of favourite memories supporting Celtic in your relatively short time in Chicago, and also your kind of bigger memories from your own time when you were in Glasgow?
Yeah. So I'll stay short term for now. It's probably the last Rangers game. We obviously, the result helps, beating them 2-0. But after us taking over the social media and stuff like that about a year or so ago, we'd seen the turnouts getting bigger, which has been nice, because the main example I used was the Real Madrid home game in the Champions League last season. We had about 8 of us round one table because it was a Tuesday afternoon. But then the Champions League opener this season, we filled the whole room. Yeah. So it was kind of like they were looking at the same time, same kind of level of game here, and we got more people out. So that felt good. But then we kind of pushed on from that and organised a raffle. And that's when we got a Liam Scales match-worn jersey, Chicago Fire signed jersey, tickets, Chicago Fire games, whiskey bottles and stuff like that. And then seeing the whole room packed and everyone like enjoying the raffle, getting involved, and we raised over $1,000 for the Celtic Foundation to do that. And just seeing all the hard work come into something good. And to take it back to what Mike was saying about our friend, the paramedic, his name is Dan Parry. He was also a very vocal activist in the Chicago area. And you still see a lot of people at Chicago Fire games with the Celtic and Chicago Fire half and half scarves and stuff like that in his honour. And it's kind of important to me to carry on that legacy, because that's the way a lot of people in Chicago look at Celtic, is through his charity work. And that was how they found out about it. So it's important to keep that going and keep building on it and keep working with the local fan groups and that.
Yeah, and it's great to hear, that Dan's name lives on in such a positive manner. I'll stay with you, Paul, on a question which you've started to lean in towards. It's about your aspirations, or the aspirations of the club, in terms of what does the future hold. So, as I say, we're approaching 30 years of the Chicago CSC, but what's your kind of, without being too fluffy, your hopes and dreams for the future of the club?
Yeah, so we spoke briefly about the 30th anniversary a few times. I think it'll kind of collide with the next Vegas conference as well, so maybe we can try and do a bit of me up there, but we spoke about merch and things like that. But I think sticking short term is just about growing the attendance every week. We've got some more events planned. We're going to get some more raffles sorted. We're trying to get a lot more people to Chicago Fire games, especially now that we've got Celtic pre-season legend Andy Gutman at left back. So we've got a few people hounding me about how to get season tickets and stuff for those games. So it's about just trying to grow in the football community in Chicago, because we've got the World Cup coming to America in 2026. Chicago doesn't have a game, but it's still going to get the boost from the country hosting the World Cup. So it's about setting good foundations before that happens. So then when people do perk up saying we want to watch a game, we've got it all set up for them.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got plenty of things in the pipeline there, and a few ideas bouncing around. Mike, from your side of things, you've mentioned you're one of around about 20 founding members, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of different people come and go, and attendances fluctuate. What's your own hopes for the years ahead for the club?
Obviously, for the club to continue and thrive, it's certainly, membership, at different points in times has been as high as 120. Now our membership is around 30 pretty dedicated supporters, and then a number, obviously, we get more people for cup finals and matches against them, but the idea is to leave a legacy for Celtic in Chicago, continuing supporters club, continue, one of the things that, Paul and Alan Wade have been very good about is connecting ties to younger people in Chicago, both Celtic supporters and in the larger soccer community, and getting them involved and engaged. So we'd like to continue to do that. We'd like to work on, ties, be more visible in the soccer community, from an actual playing standpoint. A lot of our memories are, we have memories of playing, but we're not active anymore. But we'd like to continue to do something, whether it's in, the Fire is working to interact with the supporters communities in Chicago. So we, look forward to putting out Celtic Supporters Club teams in those competitions. We can certainly get people to come out and support them on the sideline. A lot of us would be very good about having a bevy on the sideline and providing constructive criticism to referees for during these matches. But so we looked at, we're just looking to keep the community, the community of Celtic supporters growing in Chicago, whether they feel part of the Celtic Supporters Club or just attached to the club as sympathizers. We're looking to continue to grow that.
Yeah, and how important is charity to you guys, Mike? So Paul's mentioned, a few times different raffles you've done and raising good funds and channeling them back to the Celtic Foundation here, which is great, and they do some brilliant work here in Glasgow and much further afield, actually. How important in general is charity to you guys at the club?
One of the things that, as you may be aware, in Chicago, Chicago is experiencing an influx of refugees from the border that are being, shipped here by the state of Texas and rather unceremoniously dumped on the streets of Chicago, unprepared and unaware that they're actually coming to Chicago. And, it fits the ethos of Celtic, which is a club built, for the, built on integrating immigrants into a society that perhaps overall was not welcoming to them, but being that link to, in the past, it's a good thing for the Chicago C to be involved in. And, I think that we'll see the Chicago C being involved in that and continue to be involved in that one, if this crisis eases, but we'll still be involved in supporting the things that are at the core of the club, Celtic's experience.
Yeah, now that's great to hear. We're drawing into the end of the recording as such, but I've got what is a very short question, but I'm not sure it's a short answer. But I'll come to you first, Paul. And the question is simply, just what does being a supporter of Celtic Football Club mean to you?
In one word, everything. And I know that's a cop-out. But really, there's not a minute goes by where isn't Celtic on my mind, and it's because there's so many aspects of my life that I can live through Celtic, but in a way that keeps me happy. I mean, even though it's hard at times, but like through the charity work, the ethos of the fans, the respect that you get for like wearing a Celtic top around the city, like people, like you don't see many Rangers tops. I mean, I know don't like to compare, but I think I've seen like 2 or 3 Rangers tops in my time in Chicago, and I see Celtic tops all the time. So it gives you a sense of pride for your people and where you come from, and just pride, if anything.
Yeah. And yourself, Mike, as we've touched on, founding father there at the Chicago CSC, you've your own interest and journey into Celtic, but just how important are Celtic to you now, and generally speaking, what has being a supporter mean to you?
Well, being a supporter to me is the sense of community that Celtic, brings. There's the small local community. There's a larger community in North America. There's a larger community all through the world with the diaspora of Celtic supporters. And then, when I've been at Celtic, I've always found, people interested. Everybody seems to be interested in everyone's path to Celtic. Many people have grown up with Celtic multiple generations in their family, but there's, I've never been made to feel that my being a Celtic supporter is inferior to their Celtic experiences. I just think it's a welcoming, inclusive community, Catholic in the lower C sense of all encompassing and all welcome to all.
Yeah. We chatted briefly, Mike, before, going live here with the recording. And a question that I'll be asking the various CSCs is, are non-members welcome? If anyone wanted to find you guys and come and join you for a game, or even not a game, is there a welcome mat laid out for anyone that wants to come join you?
Yeah, we are welcome. We are a welcoming community. We would never, there are matches because of licensing hours and other things that are going in a pub that we are 21 and over for some matches, but very few matches. We certainly welcome, we've had, very, very young children in, we've had, families with children come in. I would say that we aim to be welcoming. We're an inclusive club rather than an exclusive club.
Yeah. And that's at AJ Hudson's, and that is a central venue in the city?
Well, we're located, in Chicago. It's roughly half a mile from Wrigley Field. It's fairly easy to get to on public transportation. We get people that are staying in the city that come to us, people that, it's relatively easy as far as Chicago traffic can be. It's fairly centrally located for anyone, even at 6 a.m. people are able to find us.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's not too much traffic at that time in the morning. Paul, just in terms of maybe the social media side as much as anything, where can folks maybe get in touch if they want to drop you a note, maybe they're planning a visit to Chicago or anything like that? Is there a place you can direct them to?
Yeah, so the CSC account is at Chicago. Let me double check this actually.
I'll share these in the show notes as well.
Yeah. I had it saved as well. Where are we? Yeah, Chicago Celtic SC.
Chicago Celtic SC.
Yeah.
Is Twitter, or X as it's now known, is that your kind of main place for
Yeah,
communicating with fans?
that's where we get most of our stuff. We do have an Instagram account as well. This is just the same.
Great.
And then if you need me, I'm at CTPaul90. If you just want to get involved in like football around the city or charity around the city, like I'm usually trying to plan something or I'm aware of stuff going on.
Great stuff. And as I say, I'll share these links in the show notes for anyone that looks to get in touch with you guys. Paul, I'll stay with you just now, just for your own final comments. As I say, a big thank you to yourself and Mike, first of all, for joining me for the first of these recordings, but your own just general comments, whatever that may be, being part of the club, being part of the bigger club of Celtic in general.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure getting to know the guys and Mike, and traveling to going to Vegas with the guys a couple of years ago, but then just meeting everyone, the large community, is an absolute pleasure. Makes you proud to be a Celtic fan. And then on top of that, like, just the charity side of things is huge for us, especially in sports in Chicago. I'll say soccer season because it's Chicago. Like Mike spoke about the refugees getting dumped in Chicago. Something me and my friends done about a year ago, called Red Line Supporters Group. We go to all the Chicago Fire games and all Chicago soccer teams. We done a big fundraiser to buy AstroTurf boots for all the Venezuelan refugees that were getting brought up, and then we put on weekly pick-up five-a-side games at a local park, and we brought them along, gave them their boots. They all got to play, and then Chicago Fire came along and gave them tickets to the next home game and stuff like that. And we're just trying to get more stuff like that going on. And through Celtic, I think that's very easy and to do that because everybody here is aware of Celtic's charitable causes and they're always wanting to work with us.
Yeah, and it's really good to hear that you're doing what sounds like a lot of really good charitable stuff there, Paul, in Celtic's name, but obviously all the way across the water there in Chicago. So great to hear that. Mike, your own final comments, as we've touched on, founding father, long-time Celtic fan now, maybe one of the more experienced members of the group. Is it fair to say? But any final comments from yourself, Mike?
I mean, it's been work. It's been it's a labor of love, but it's good. I don't think that, if you ask the members that are still around that started this club 30 years ago, I don't think we'd have any idea what it would be like now. I think that, we're looking, at the short term, but, here we are, relatively speaking, we're an institution, and what you want to leave it, you want to leave the world a better place than when you found it. Want to leave the Celtic supporters, the Celtic community in Chicago a better place than when we found it 30 years ago. And then I feel, one of the great things about the last several years is getting, the club getting reinvigorated by people like Paul, people like Alan that are coming in that have, realized that they can offer things to the club that we didn't have that would help us continue to, to thrive and grow in the, for the next 30 years. The work we're doing now will put us in a good place for somebody to come back, in 2056 and do something on the, the 60th anniversary of the Chicago CSC. Paul will be around for that. I don't expect to be around for that, but we'll look for that to continue.
Yeah, it's great to see. As I say, whether it's the charity side of things, or even just being a welcoming place for people across the globe to come and watch football, it sounds like you guys are doing some great things. I suppose that, just as we start to wrap things up, I'd like to wish you all the best for your 30th next year and beyond. You never know, at some point I may end up there. I hope I do. And I'll be sure to look you guys up. But in the meantime, all that's left for me to say is a massive thanks to Mike and Paul for joining me on the Celtic Exchange today and for being amongst the first to share their CSC story with us. If you want us to feature your own CSC in a future episode, then just get in touch on our social media or via the website at thecelticexchange.com. Remember that CSC Stories is brought to you in partnership with Football Without Fans, the definitive guide to Celtic supporters clubs around the globe. And you can pick up a copy of that on Amazon and various other places right now. And again, we'll link to that in the show notes for this episode. But in the meantime, thanks again to Mike and Paul. And finally, thanks to you for tuning in. We'll be back again soon with more CSC stories.